A glamorous businesswoman with a huge bank account longing for companionship. An anesthetist with a charming smile who dreamed of his queen. A whirlwind of passion caught them at their first encounter, but not everyone was happy to see the joy in their love-struck eyes. The main character of our story today is Deborah Newell. Deborah is very stylish, successful, and very wealthy. Yet millions didn't just fall from the sky. To achieve financial independence, she had to work hard. She spent years in interior design and reached incredible heights. Eventually, Deborah founded her own design company named Ambrosia and dedicated 30 years to this business. Deborah loved her work, but there wasn't much true love in her life. She was married 4 times, but all marriages ended in divorce. She had 4 children and was a wonderful mother, but somehow, things never worked out with men. There came a time when her future was secured for the coming decades. She longed for simple feminine happiness. A few years ago, a tragedy in Deborah's family changed her life. In March 1984, her brother-in-law, Billy Wickers, murdered her older sister, Cindy. During the trial, Cindy's and Deborah's mother sided with Billy and testified against her own daughter. Eventually, Wickers received a very short prison sentence and spent only a few years behind bars for such a terrible crime. Cindy and Billy had 2 children. This tragedy left deep scars in their hearts. After this incident, Deborah became very nervous and was panic-stricken at the thought of firearms. Many friends advised her to buy a gun because she lived alone for a long time. But she couldn't physically stand to have a weapon near her. Deborah preferred to be surrounded by beautiful things and always present herself well. She spent a lot of time and money on her hair, makeup, and skincare. She had many designer items like Gucci shoes, Cartier jeans, and Chanel diamonds. At this point in her life, the only thing missing was a loving man by her side. The second protagonist of this story, John Meehan, was born in February 1958 in California and grew up with his sisters, Karen and Donna. His father was a liar and a cheater. All these traits were inherited by his son, John. From a young age, he engaged in fraud and lived by deception. John sold illegal substances and also consumed them. Due to his illegal activities with the police, he was expelled from California. In 1988, he graduated from the University of Arizona with a degree in art, and then went to the law school at the University of Dayton. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John because he could seduce any woman. John was a handsome man, just under 190 centimeters tall, with hazel eyes and thick dark hair. He had a charming smile that attracted women. After his studies, John met a woman named Tanya S., who was a practicing anesthetist. John and Tanya married in November 1990. She was 25 and he was 31. A large part of their relationship was built on lies. John never introduced Tanya to his family, claiming they were all bad people. His wife helped him through nursing school in Tennessee, and he obtained an anesthesiology license. They had 2 children together, but after some time, their marriage fell apart. Tanya learned from John's mother and sisters that he had lied about his background. She also discovered John's secret stash of pills, which he had stolen from needy patients and was addicted to, explaining his mood swings. Tanya immediately informed the police. After an investigation, John confessed to everything, but instead of turning himself in, he fled the state and moved into a hotel in Michigan. The police had no trouble finding him. John was found unconscious, surrounded by empty pill bottles. Thus, they called an ambulance, but on the way he came to, grabbed the medication and jumped out of the ambulance. They found and arrested him again and sentenced him in Michigan to 6 years in prison for resisting arrest and possession of illegal substances. However, John only spent 17 months in prison. He found a way to shorten his sentence and was released in 2004. At this time in his life, he met Deborah. John was 55 and Deborah was 59. She decided to try her luck with online dating, and that's where they found each other. Deborah was very impressed with his profile. John wrote that he was a divorced doctor and Christian seeking love. At this point, she had a few terrible dates behind her, but when she met John, he showed such sincere interest in her life and praised her achievements that Deborah was pleasantly surprised. Their first date was in October 2014. They went to a restaurant named Houston's in Irvine, California. John's task was to impress Deborah. He excitedly told stories from his alleged past, where he had worked for Doctors Without Borders in Iraq, which were completely made up. He said he had 2 children and a few houses. Deborah painted the picture of a doctor who had given everything he had to the world. He behaved as if Deborah was the most amazing woman in the world, a queen, exactly the feeling a woman tired of loneliness wanted to feel. Then, the man expressed his desire to meet her family. In his sweet words, Deborah's heart stopped. The woman melted from attention and praise, so they ended up in her penthouse right after the restaurant. But here, John went too far and wanted more after a kiss. Deborah didn't like being pressured and asked the man to leave. The next morning, John decided to correct his mistake and called Deborah. He apologized, saying he had drunk too much and couldn't restrain his feelings. This confession elevated him again in the woman's eyes, and the dates continued. Time passed, their relationship developed, and the couple spent a lot of time together. By the 3rd date, John had confessed his love and proposed to her. They enjoyed each other's company so much that Deborah overlooked some odd things, for example, that her boyfriend always appeared in a worn-out and outdated medical uniform. Deborah hosted a fashionable charity event, to which she invited John, and he came again in his uniform, claiming he simply had no time to change, but she didn't care. She introduced him to her friends and proudly posed in front of the cameras with her doctor. With each day, they grew closer, and eventually, they moved in together. One of Deborah's daughters, Jacqueline, lived in the penthouse with her mother. The girl was quite straightforward and very critical of all the men her mother brought home, and she was not afraid to speak her mind. As Deborah brought John home more and more often, Jacqueline noticed more and more things she didn't like about him. She said he looked like a homeless loser and was very surprised that her mother, who indulged in Gucci and Chanel, got involved with this guy in a dirty coat. In the penthouse, he looked at all the artworks, statues, and paintings too closely, as if he was appraising their value. John convinced Deborah that they should live separately, and a few weeks after their first meeting, they found a house to rent for $6,500 a month on the shore of Balboa Island in Newport. Deborah paid several months' rent in advance and spent $80,000 on their move, while John didn't even put his name on the lease agreement, citing some tax issues. The woman was so blinded by love and attention that she was willing to pay for everything herself. Deborah did this without her children's knowledge. She didn't understand why her children didn't like John, as he treated her like a queen. Her chosen one prepared fresh coffee for her in the mornings, bought groceries, and tried to make her life easier. Deborah was convinced she had hit the jackpot. She convinced herself that her children would adjust over time, and they could be a happy family. She decided to introduce John to her younger daughter, Tara, who had a gentler character than Jacqueline. Tara lived with her boyfriend in Las Vegas, and when her mother told her about John on the phone, Tara decided to meet him in person. She arrived just as her mother and her boyfriend were moving into a new house. Tara did not like John from the first meeting. He showed no joy towards her, silently carried things into the house without any help, trying to play the cool guy. But Tara wanted to give him another chance. That wasn't necessary, as Tara immediately noticed alarming signs. John had no car. He claimed to own houses in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, but he never offered to move there or visit them. He spent most of the day at home playing video games. Shortly before Thanksgiving, Tara went through John's things and found a certificate that he was a nurse and understood that he was not a doctor. When John learned of this, he became angry and made a big scandal. He accused Tara of robbing her mother of her happiness, screaming that they could not be separated, while Deborah just stood there and listened. Eventually, they had a big fight, and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children only wanted her fortune and were waiting for her death, hence they didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene came. She was very religious. John played a religious show in front of her, but instead got another scandal. The feast ended in another fiasco. Afterward, Deborah sought a psychotherapist who advised her to set boundaries for her children and live her life, which she did. She and John settled on Balboa Island, spent time in restaurants, walked around, and just enjoyed the landscapes. John sometimes behaved like a teenager, took shirtless selfies, and sent them to her, thus bringing her back to her youth. Deborah was overjoyed, but she was still concerned about John's wardrobe. Apart from his old nursing uniform, he only had baggy, torn pants and old t-shirts, and Deborah wanted her man to look good and fit her lifestyle. According to him, all his good clothes were stolen during a mission in Iraq, so Deborah took him shopping and bought him a completely new wardrobe full of designer clothing. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a business trip to Las Vegas. At this point, they had known each other for less than 2 months, but decided to get married anyway. The woman kept this event secret from her children. One day, a strange woman broke into the house of John and Deborah. John used the situation to convince Deborah that they should enhance their security. Later, he installed a lot of surveillance cameras in the house, which he could control from his phone. He also installed cameras in her office to monitor her. John wanted to have everything under control. Deborah eventually started asking questions about his family and his past, but for every question, John had an answer or an excuse. Despite obvious hints, Deborah overlooked them. She believed she had found the perfect guy, but her children didn't give up. Jacqueline decided to conduct her own investigation. Since he didn't have his own car, he drove Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline put trackers on the car to track his movements, but the surveillance didn't yield any results. Then, she and Tara hired a private detective. Soon, the detective brought information. They learned that John had filed for bankruptcy, that he had a nursing license but no medical license, and that he had lived in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One of the addresses associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters told their mother about it, Deborah replied that even if it were true, her feelings were no less genuine. At the end of March, a letter for John arrived, which Deborah received. The letter was from a former prisoner, but she couldn't read it. John rushed over and snatched the envelope from her hands. At first, he screamed and accused his wife of mistrust, but then he explained that it was a pen pal he was morally supporting. Something about this explanation didn't sit right with Deborah. The next day, when John was away on business, she decided to rummage through his things. That's when she began to learn a lot about the man she was married to. It turned out that he was actually a former nurse who had become too dependent on painkillers, was arrested, and not only went to jail but also ruined his entire career. Deborah also found out that he was a fraudster. She found court records stating that John had previously deceived and stolen from many women he had met online. The search protocol described a search of his storage where the police found a .38 ammunition, a GPS device, syringes, and more. Only now did Deborah realize that John was not at all who he pretended to be. He was a very dangerous man, a criminal with a firearm. He had several court restraining orders from several women, and worst of all, he was released from prison on October 8th and met her a few days later. The woman, shocked by the new information, sifted through the documents. Deborah was shocked and frightened. Only now did she begin to understand that John could have harmed her or her children. Deborah decided to pretend everything was okay for a while. A few days later, when John went to the hospital for back problems, she started to act. Her family helped her move. While they were packing her things, they found more documents belonging to John. These were printouts of online comments about him written by other women who had known John. They described him as a convincing, skilled liar and advised not to let this man into their lives, not to be deceived by his good looks and charming prince character. Now Deborah was sure this man was insane. She decided to tell him she was ending the relationship and leaving, but John continued to write messages and begged her to visit him in the hospital, and Deborah gave in. She felt guilty for leaving him. In June 2015, John finally convinced her to return to him. He found 1,000 explanations for all the strange things in his possession. He had hidden his past from Deborah because he knew such a woman would otherwise not pay any attention to him. John pretended to be a doctor to impress her, and now he pleaded with her to help him clean up and save his life. Deborah, still in love, gave him a second chance. They moved together into a new apartment in Irvine. This decision angered her children greatly, so the two kept away from them for a while. It was March 2016. They had been married for a year and 3 months. Deborah helped John fight his addiction, but she was burdened by the fact that her entire family hated him, especially Jacqueline, and this hatred was mutual. It got to the point where John forbade Deborah to see her daughter. When John found out that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate courses, he called the school and slandered the girl in front of the teachers. He also sent her threatening, indecent messages, saying that her mother wanted nothing to do with her, and threatened that one day he would come and kill Jacqueline. It seemed that John was recovering, but in the process, he became increasingly evil and cruel. In April 2016, Deborah reached her limit and filed for divorce. She wanted to end the relationship peacefully, so she began to gradually withdraw money from her bank account to keep it safe. But in her hiding spot, in one of the lower drawers, lay $30,000. When John discovered this money, he said it belonged to him too. The man realized things were heading towards a divorce and began to become aggressive. Deborah knew she had to flee. She packed a little makeup and work clothes and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine. She felt safe there because the building had many surveillance cameras. She tried to obtain a restraining order, but the judge in Orange County denied her request because there was no direct threat. John lived in another state and did nothing. All she could do was end the relationship and just move on. After she left, John moved into one of her houses in Nevada. He continued to call her, but the woman did not pick up the phone. Then he decided to act differently. On June 11th, 2016, Deborah came to work with her Jaguar. During the day, the car was stolen from the office parking lot. It was found about a block and a half away, doused with gasoline and set on fire, but there was no fire, only minor damage. Surveillance cameras clearly showed that the car was stolen by John Mihan. This audacity of her ex-husband frightened Deborah. Now she knew John was back in town. She called Jacqueline and Tara and warned them. On the evening of August 20th, 2016, Tara came from work and parked in the parking lot. As she got out of the car, John appeared out of nowhere. The man attacked her with a knife and tried to push her back into the car. Tara began to scream loudly to attract attention. The man covered her mouth with his hand, but immediately regretted it. The girl bit him with all her strength. A fight broke out between them in the middle of the street. Tara wore heavy boots. She managed to kick her attacker and knock the knife out of his hand. Then, without hesitation, she grabbed the blade and began to stab John. She delivered 13 stabs, the last one hitting directly in the eye. She trembled. Fortunately, a neighbor saw the girl. She ran over with a towel to wrap the wounds and called the police. But John did not die. When the paramedics arrived, he still had a pulse. In his car, the police found duct tape, zip ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. Everything looked as if he had planned to kidnap Tara and take her out of the city as a hostage. John Mihan was admitted to the hospital and died 4 days later. At that time, he was 57 years old. His body was cremated. There was no funeral. Everyone who knew him hated him. Deborah and her children were very traumatized by this situation. The woman needed some time to return to a normal life, but she still struggles with the guilt of having brought a criminal into her family. Deborah became very cautious. Now she always carries a stun gun and pepper spray with her to protect herself at all times. She said she would never meet people on the internet again.